Order! Order! Questions to Mr Chancellor of the Exchequer, Mrs Emma Lewell-Buck.
Number 1, Mr Speaker.
Mr Speaker, I'd like to answer this question together with questions 2, 3 and 4. Last night, unelected Labour and Liberal peers have voted down the financial measures on tax credits approved by this elected House of Commons. That raises clear constitutional issues which we will deal with. We will continue to reform tax credits and save the money needed so that Britain lives within its means, while at the same time lessening the impact on families during the transition. I will set out the plans in the autumn statement. We remain as determined as ever to build the low-tax, low-welfare, high-wage economy that Britain needs and the British people want to see.
Emma Lewell-Buck.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. 6,800 children in South Shields are growing up in families which rely on tax credits. One of my constituents told me that tax credits at the moment only just make it possible for families to feed and clothe their children as it is. If this government keep making cuts to those of us who are the lowest paid, we may just give up hope. The public, the experts, some of his own MPs and the other players all agree that his plans will victimise working parents and their children. So can the Chancellor please give my constituents some hope and shelve these ridiculous tax credit cuts?
We will give her constituents support, and indeed the constituents we all represent in this House, by continuing to deliver economic security in this country. Economic security that has seen unemployment fall in her constituency by 44% since 2010. And one of the ways we deliver economic security is by controlling our welfare bill and making sure this country lives within its means. That is what we will continue to do.
Mr Osborne.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The Chancellor has singularly failed to listen to the SNP and to this House when we have said he needs to think again about tax credits. He sounds like he's more keen on dealing with the peers than listening to them. So how about he listens to the people and just drops these tax credit plans once and for all?
Well, this House of Commons voted 3 times for the changes that were rejected by the House of Lords, and I'm sure that we look forward to the support of the Scottish Nationalist Party in that constitutional question. But I would make this point to her constituents. We need to have a welfare system that works. We need to move to a lower welfare, higher wage economy. We do that by introducing the national living wage and having a welfare bill that the country can afford. That is the best thing we can do for the security of the people that she represents.
Streeting.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. If the Chancellor had listened to the evidence from the outset, he wouldn't be in this mess. And if his backbenchers had voted with their feet, with their consciences, there would be an alignment of opinion between this House and the other place. Instead of manufacturing a phony constitutional crisis, why won't he put his toys back in the pram and appreciate he needs to go back to the drawing board with his failed policy that hits working people the hardest?
We will deliver the welfare savings that we were elected to deliver in this Parliament. Now, we will help people in the transition to that lower welfare, higher wage economy. But I remember a time when the Labour Party used to support moving from welfare to work. They've entirely abandoned that approach. We will be the party that stands up for working people, and working people need controlled welfare and a country that lives within its means.
Naz Shah. Not here. Mr Andrew Tyree.
Does the Chancellor agree that whatever our views may be in this House on the tax credit dispute, in overturning the settled will of the elected chamber, the unelected Lords have exercised the powers of a Chamber of Parliament in the tax area where for at least 100 years it has been well established that they have and should have only the legitimacy of a consultative assembly.
Well, I think the chair of the Treasury Select Committee makes an important point. Of course, on only 5 occasions in recent decades have the House of Lords ever blocked or rejected a statutory instrument, never on a financial matter. And we had a whole range of opinions from Lord Butler, the former Cabinet Secretary, to constitutional experts like Vernon Bogdanor telling us yesterday that this was unprecedented. It is something we are going to have to address. The Prime Minister has made that very clear, and that is what we're going to do in order to make sure that the elected House of Commons is responsible for the tax and spend decisions that affect the people of this country.
Sir Edward Lee.
The Chancellor knows I've written to him about a lady who I've talked to at length in my constituency, Stacey, only earns £11,000 a year, and she says that £31 a week has been cut from her budget. But I know the Chancellor will meet me and discuss this. Surely the point about this is that we should have the conversations here. He will listen, and ultimately we will be held responsible and chucked out. What is not right is that unelected people who never have to stand again should decide how the people are taxed and how we spend our money.
Well, I agree with my honourable friend on the constitutional point, and as I say, this is a matter which I think the whole House of Commons will want to address. And look, I take very seriously the point he raises about his constituent. I've made it clear that we will listen about how we make the transition to this lower welfare, higher wage economy. When we've introduced controversial welfare changes in the last Parliament, for example, on removing child benefit from higher earners, or when we introduced a welfare cap, we did make changes, listening to Parliament, to smooth the transition to both of those important reforms. So, of course, we will listen to the House of Commons in this respect. But the end goal is clear. This country cannot have an unlimited welfare budget that squeezes out other areas of public expenditure. We can't have a situation where we have 1% of the world's population, 4% of the world's economy, but 7% of the world's welfare budget.
Philip Davis.
Speaker, can I urge the Chancellor to stick to his guns on the issue of tax credits? Gordon Brown spent billions of pounds he didn't have on tax credits to try and buy votes at the 2010 election. And does the Chancellor agree with me that there is no painless way out of huge debt, and people would do well to remember that before they ever elect a free-spending Labour government again?
Well, I completely agree with my honourable friend, and of course, spending on tax credits went up 3 times during that period of the last Labour government, and yet working poverty increased during that period. In other words, it had completely the opposite effect intended. And the people who suffer when the country loses control of its public finances are indeed the low-paid. They are the people who get turned out of work. It's not the richest in the country, it's not the trade union barons who lose their job when that happens. It is the poorest in our country. What we can deliver for them is economic security. So yes, we will listen on the transition, but we are determined to deliver controlled welfare and economic security for the working people of this country.
Sarah Champion.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Children's Society estimate there are 10,000 children living in 5,100 families in Rotherham who will be punished by the tax credit changes. What transitional provisions will the Chancellor put in place to support them?
Well, I will set out at the autumn statement how we make sure that we smooth the transition to this lower welfare, higher wage economy that the people of Rotherham and the rest of the country want to see. We have to make choices in this country. Are we prepared to see our country decline? Are we prepared to see our budget out of control? Are we prepared to see jobs lost? Or do we want to continue delivering the economic security that sees a record number of people in work and has seen employment increase in Rotherham?
Fox.
Speaker, the average taxpayer in this country now pays £2,000 a year in extra tax just because of the government's debt interest payments. Isn't it time we saw this debt tax on the payslips of this country so that those who believe they can spend with impunity, including the unelected chamber, recognise the cost that this will provide to future generations?
Well, my right honourable friend is quite right to call it a debt tax. Indeed, one of the largest items of government spending is paying the creditors who we owe to pay who fund our national debt, and that crowds out the spending that we could be putting into our education system or our transport system and the like. We, of course, have taken forward an innovation actually put forward by a backbencher in the last Parliament on this side of the House, and we now send a tax statement to every taxpayer so they can see how much we spend on debt interest and how urgent it is that we remove this deficit and we reject those who want to borrow forever.
Christopher Leslie.
On this constitutional point, will the Chancellor now read out the specific sentence in the Conservative Party manifesto where he promised he was going to be cutting these tax credits?
Give him a job. Well, I'm very glad he's got a copy of the Conservative manifesto. It's an excellent document that says we're going to deliver better schools for people, we're going to put more money into the National Health Service for people, we're going to invest in transport for people, and it says in that document we're going to make £12 billion of welfare savings.
Mr. Richard Fuller.
Mr. Speaker, it's good to see the Chancellor in listening mode, but there is another group that practically can assist in this, which we're not talking about, which is companies. Are our companies in listening mode about the measures that they can take to move forward, moving their employees to the national living wage much more rapidly? What can the Chancellor say about what they're doing to help on this issue?
Well, my honourable friend raises a very important point, which, of course, the savings we make in welfare are part of a package which includes a national living wage. Now, although the national living wage starts to come in next year, actually over 200 major companies have already, since the budget, introduced wage increases that match what we're proposing to do by statute. Companies like Sainsbury's, Morrison's, Costa Coffee and many others. So we're already seeing the benefits of the national living wage coming into effect before it's even introduced.
Good, Hosey.
Mr. Speaker, we know that there are 500,000 more children in poverty since 2010, and potentially... and 500,000 more children in poverty since 2010, and potentially 4 million children in poverty by the end of this Parliament. If the Chancellor is in listening mode, knowing he does not need to make these cuts in order to balance the budget, why does he not listen to those who say, stop now with the policy of tax credit cuts?
Well, I'm afraid the honourable gentleman is just not correct on the numbers. Child poverty is down by 300,000 since 2010. And the number of children in workless households is now 500,000 fewer than it was when this government came to office. The truth is, it is difficult to take any lectures from the SNP about balancing the books. They made forecasts for their oil revenues, which would have left Scotland with a £30 billion black hole if they had ever got their way. So we will go on delivering economic security for the people of Scotland and indeed the rest of the United Kingdom by taking the difficult decisions that his party ducks.
The Chancellor is in denial. Is it not the case, Mr. Speaker? Absolute denial. That yesterday, the 26th of October, demonstrated two things. The Chancellor has lost his political touch, and his chance of being Prime Minister has just gone up in a puff of ermine-clad smoke.
Was that a Treasury question, is it?
Well, as ever, when pressed, actually all they want to talk about is party political games rather than sorting out the mess that this country was in 6 or 7 years ago. As a result of the changes we have made, there are hundreds of thousands more people in Scotland with jobs. Businesses are investing in Scotland as they are across the United Kingdom, and we will go on making those changes. He can go and praise in aid a House of Lords that he has spent his whole life campaigning to abolish. I'm going to go on delivering the reforms to our economy that are needed to help Scotland continue to grow.
Victoria Atkins.
At the end of the last Labour government, 9 out of 10 families with children were eligible for tax credits, some of whom earned up to £60,000. In other words, they were paying their taxes and then getting some back. Isn't it better to reduce taxes in the first place so that people keep more of their hard-earned income?
Well, I think my honourable friend speaks for her Lincolnshire constituents and for the whole United Kingdom in saying what we want to do is move to that lower tax, lower welfare, higher wage society. We took a step in the budget by increasing the personal allowance to £11,000. We also cut taxes for business, reducing corporation tax, expanding the employment allowance so that smaller businesses could take more people on. It is all about continuing to deliver the record levels of employment we see in our country and indeed the growing economy, which today's GDP figures confirm.
McDonnell!
Can I say this? Can I remind the House, the 3 million people out there who've done everything asked of them, bringing up their children, going to work, this is not a constitutional matter. They will lose £1,300 a year. Can I, given what happened in the other place last night, can I reassure the Chancellor that if he brings forward proposals to reverse the cuts to tax credits fairly and in full, he will not be attacked by this side of the House. Indeed, he will be applauded. But can he assure us that whatever proposals he brings forward, he will not support any that an independent assessment demonstrates will cause any child to be forced to live below the poverty line?
Well, look, I'm of course happy to accept any proposals that he puts forward, but I would make this point. I'm happy to listen to those proposals, but let me make this point. There is a difference between those who say we want to make no savings to welfare at all, we want to abolish things like the benefit cap, we're not prepared to make savings at all to the tax credit system, and those who have said, yes, we do want to move to a lower welfare society, but we want help in the transition. Now, if he has proposals to help in the transition, of course I will listen to them, but if he is again promoting uncapped welfare and unlimited borrowing, then I'm afraid I don't think the British people are going to listen to him.
The Chancellor has a choice before him. He can push on with the tax giveaways to multinational corporations. He can press on with tax cuts to the wealthiest few in inheritance tax that he announced in his summer budget. Or he can reverse those tax breaks to the few and instead go for a less excessive surplus target in 2019 and 20 and be in a position to avoid penalising the 3 million working families with these tax credit cuts and stick to his self-imposed charter. Is he prepared to listen to reason on this matter? Is he willing, or is anyone on that side prepared to step up and show some leadership on this issue?
Let's remember, we inherited a tax system where city bankers were paying lower tax rates than the people who cleaned for them, and multinationals were paying no tax at all. Now, we have introduced a new tax to make sure that multinationals do not divert their profits, and we increased capital gains tax precisely to avoid that abuse of the tax rates. So we're not going to take lectures from the Labour Party on a fair tax system. And I would say this to him. He in a way, reveals what he believes, which I, of course, completely respect, which is he says, abandon your surplus rule, run a deficit forever. I profoundly disagree with that central judgment. I think if you borrow forever, if you are not prepared to make difficult decisions on welfare, you are going to condemn this country to decline. And that means that as a result, people are going to become unemployed and living standards are going to fall. That is not the Britain I want to see. We're going to go on taking those difficult decisions to deliver that lower welfare, lower tax and higher wage economy. And this elected House of Commons is going to go on promoting the economic plan that delivers that.
5, Mr. Speaker, sir.
Mr. Speaker, I am currently in discussions with the Scottish Government on the design of its new fiscal framework. We've met on 4 occasions, and after each meeting a joint statement has been released providing details on the items covered. Talks have been constructive and we are hopeful of coming to a final agreement in due course.
Sir John Nicholson.
Mr. Speaker, does the Chief Secretary remain committed to a funding formula based on Barnett as promised in the vow and as referred to in the Smith Commission?
Mr. Speaker, the Government remains absolutely committed to the Barnett formula and delivering all aspects of the Smith Agreement during the fiscal framework and in the Scotland Bill that is before this House at the moment.
Mr. Peter Bone.
Mr. Speaker, would the excellent Minister think again on that answer? Because my constituents have £2,000 less per person on public expenditure than constituents in Scotland, and we pay the same taxes. How can that be fair?
Quite right.
Mr. Speaker, I think it's worth noting that, of course, the Barnett formula will continue, but it will diminish in importance. For the first time, more than half of the Scottish Government's budget will come from Scottish taxpayers rather than a grant from the UK Government, which I think will add extra accountability to the Scottish Government.
John Howell.
Number 6, sir.
Mr. Speaker, I should like to answer this question with question number 7. We have a record number of people in work, and today's GDP data shows that Britain continues to outperform other Western economies, but there are clear global risks, and there is still much more to be done to fix our economy. In the autumn statement, we'll take more steps to ensure we feel the recovery right across the country, make the long-term investments for the future, and crucially, continue to make the tough decisions required so that Britain lives within her means.
I thank the Chancellor for that answer. The total number of unemployed in my constituency is 219, and the youth unemployment is only 36. Will my right honourable friend join me in praising institutions such as the Henley College, who are providing excellent apprenticeship training?
Well, it's very good to hear about the success that people in his constituency have had in finding work over recent years, and the clear business confidence that exists there in Oxfordshire. And I think the Henley College, which he's told me about, is doing an excellent job in making sure that young people have the skills they need to take the opportunities that are now out there in the jobs market. And of course, we're going to go on helping institutions like that by increasing the number of apprentices we fund in this country so that we deliver the 3 million apprentices that are in the election.
James Morris.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Unemployment in my constituency has fallen by 50% since 2010. But we mustn't be complacent given recent news about difficulties in Caparo in the West Midlands. But would the Chancellor agree with me that we need to do more to invest in training and skills like the new Advanced Science, Engineering and Technology Centre at Halesowen College so that we can equip local people with the skills they need to take future opportunities?
Well, I visited a number of the very successful businesses in my honourable friend's constituency with him, exactly the kind of small and medium-sized businesses that are the backbone of the British economy. Of course, they need help with their training, and Halesowen College can help provide that training to the young people in his area so they can get the jobs that are being created in his area.
Flint.
The Chancellor claims he's on the side of working people, but as far as I can see, he has been afraid to publish any impact assessment of changes to work tax credits on people taking up or remaining in work. So can I ask the Chancellor, will he guarantee that, given the decision last night and the delay, that he will look at this and any proposals he brings forward, he will include an impact assessment on people taking up, increasing their hours or staying in work, which affects the employment levels?
Well, we publish both an impact assessment and a qualities assessment, and indeed a distributional analysis of the measures that we produce to the budget. None of those things were ever produced by any Labour Chancellor. So we continue to provide the information that people seek, but what matters above all is getting that central judgment right about fixing our economy, making sure we deal with our deficit, and going on delivering economic security for the people she represents.
Mark Durkan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Chancellor is fond of telling us about 2 million more people in employment, and then he usually does a little facial lap of honour of the chamber. Has he estimated how many of those 2 million people would be hit by his proposed tax credit changes, and how many would he be comfortable with still hitting in revised changes?
Well, the measures to save welfare, and as I say, we will help with the transition, come alongside the increase in the national living wage, the increase in the personal allowance, the action we've taken to cut social rents as well. And it's all part of a package that is delivering economic security to the people in Northern Ireland and indeed across the United Kingdom. He remembers what the situation was like 5 or 6 years ago in Northern Ireland. High unemployment, a lack of business investment, people looking for work. Now we are in a situation where jobs are being created, people are finding work. Do I say everything's been done that needs to be done? Absolutely not. We've got more to do to bring jobs and investment to Northern Ireland. Let's work together to make that happen.
David Morris.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My local council keep bleating on about cuts, saying it's going to affect everybody that's actually there. But on the front page of the newspaper, a management consultancy company that they brought in said there's going to be 10,000 jobs created over the next 5 years in my constituency and the region. Would they? Yeah, very lucky. Because we've got a Chancellor, would he agree with me that his economic policies have put that on track and that we are actually going forward in my area of the world and making the area better for the people that live there?
Well, my honourable friend is absolutely right. As a result of the combination of him being a very effective local MP and the fact we have a Conservative Prime Minister and a Conservative government, we are delivering more jobs into his part of Lancashire. Indeed, I remember visiting with him the work being done on the link road to the port that for decades, including when there were Labour MPs for the constituency, they campaigned for and never were delivered. Now it is actually being built and delivered as a result of his local efforts.
Harris.
Contrary to what the Chancellor believes, my party does want to deal with the deficit. We just think he's going about it the wrong way. And we are worried about certain employment trends. For example, the Solar Trade Association has warned that up to 27,000 jobs could be at risk due to the government's announcement of withdrawal of support for solar energy schemes. What steps does the government propose to take to try to avoid large-scale redundancies in this employment trend in the solar industry, and what support will the government offer to the solar industry?
Well, of course, we are in a constant dialogue with the solar industry, and solar energy use has dramatically increased over the last 5 years, but so have the costs of that technology. So quite reasonably, we have reduced the subsidy that is going to solar. But there has to be consistency here in what Labour is arguing for. On the one hand, they say, please deal with the energy prices that are affecting the steel industry, quite reasonably, and then their spokesman gets up and says, please add more costs onto energy bills so we subsidise renewables. The trouble is, you can't have both.
Mr. Nigel Adams.
Number 8, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, I recognise that all job losses are deeply concerning for those affected. In the case of large-scale redundancies, the Job Centre Plus Rapid Response Service can provide support to those workers affected. The Rapid Response Service stands ready to provide support and is already working at Kellingley Colliery in his constituency. We may consider further intervention in exceptional cases where the impact is particularly significant.
Mr. Nigel Adams.
Thank you for that answer. I also welcome the support and retraining packages for the steel workers that has been referred to earlier. But as he rightly says, there are several hundred workers at Kellingley Colliery facing redundancy later this year, and a further 240 power station workers at Eggborough who are going through a consultation, are very worried about their future at the station and their jobs. Will the Chief Secretary meet with me urgently to discuss a similar support and retraining package for these workers in my constituency?
Mr. Speaker, I totally recognise the difficulties faced by many people in his constituency at the moment. One thing that I will say is that my honourable friend is a real champion for jobs in his constituency. I think only last week he ran his 5th annual jobs fair for his constituents, and I think that is part of the reason why unemployment is down by more than 1,000 since in the last Parliament. Of course, I'd be happy to meet with my honourable friend to discuss further what training and support is available for constituents who are affected.
Helen Goodman.
1,700 people in Redcar have lost their jobs, and throughout the North East it's expected that the total job loss will be 9,000. Could the Minister tell them how long it will be for his measures to take effect and for them to have jobs again?
Well, Mr. Speaker, we're taking a number of measures in relation to steel. We are tackling unfair trade practices and voting and speaking on that basis at EU summits. We're doing something to deal with high energy bills, and we're also making sure that more public contracts go to UK steel producers. But at the end of the day, the one thing the UK government can't do is deal with the world steel price at the moment. So we are offering comprehensive packages, particularly in Redcar, and we're making sure that the situation is as good as it can be at the moment.
McCaig.
Number 9, please, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, this government has made a long-term science capital commitment, investing £6.9 billion in the UK's research infrastructure up to 2021. In the last Parliament, we maintained the ring-fence science budget in cash terms at £4.6 billion per annum, and in 2013 provided £1.75 billion of support in research and development tax credits. Further decisions to support research will be determined at the forthcoming spending review.
Alan McCaig. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think the government's record on R&D does not match its rhetoric. Only yesterday, some of the leading companies in the UK were expressing concern that the government's reported plan to replace R&D tax credits with interest-paying loans could hit the R&D investment and send it abroad. Can I ask the Minister if he will reassure Parliament and business that R&D grants will continue to be made available to help our businesses innovate and remain competitive?
Mr. Speaker, future plans for R&D tax credits are, of course, a matter for the spending review. But where I disagree with him is on what we've done in the last 5 years. A recent evaluation by HMRC has found that of each £1 of tax foregone on R&D tax credits stimulates between £1.53 and £2.35 of additional R&D investment. The government has increased the generosity of the R&D tax credit scheme for SMEs during the last Parliament from 175% to 270%.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Chancellor and the Prime Minister have both recently visited the Manufacturing Technology Centre in my constituency. Does the Minister agree that collaboration such as this between the academic world and manufacturing industry show the way forward?
I absolutely agree with my honourable friend, particularly in areas surrounding innovation. The UK, according to the Global Innovation Index, was ranked second overall, Mr. Speaker, in the world in 2013. We are actually ranked first for the reach, impact and well-roundedness of research, and first for research productivity, 3.87 times the world average.
Number 10, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, by the end of this Parliament, local authorities will be able to retain 100% of local taxes to spend on local services, and areas with city-wide elected mayors will get even greater flexibilities over business rates. Each devolution deal will be bespoke, but the deal agreed last Friday with the North East Combined Authority includes a new £30 million a year funding allocation, which will bring together funding to deliver a 15-year programme of transformational investment in the region.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, the North East is keen, indeed determined, to slip Whitehall's leash, but some are concerned that hard-pressed civil servants will seek to devolve cuts whilst retaining control of spending. To avoid this, will the Chancellor commit to complete transparency on the budgets of the devolved function, publishing the full funding figures for the years before and after the spending review?
Mr. Speaker, of course we will publish information, but what I will say to is that the deal signed last Friday commits to £30 million of additional funding in each year going forward. And if she doesn't think it's a good deal, Mr. Speaker, perhaps she should listen to Simon Hennig, who's the chairman from her own party. She doesn't want to listen to her own party, but the chairman of the new North East Combined Authority, who said the agreement being signed today will bring significant economic benefits and opportunities for businesses and residents in the North East. She should be welcoming it, Mr. Speaker.
Speaker. Last week's announcement of 130 million in the new China cluster at Manchester Airport City and the new announcement of a flight from Manchester to China further underpins the Northern Powerhouse. Is it not clear, for all the opposition's droning on about regional policy over recent decades, it's this government and this Chancellor that's delivering a clear vision for the North?
Mr. Speaker, we had an exceptionally successful visit of the President's state visit last week, including his leg to Manchester. Particularly important in all the various announcements in Manchester in relation to the Northern Powerhouse was the start of the first direct flight connecting Manchester and the Northern Powerhouse region to China, which I'm sure will be vital for the connectivity of the Northern Powerhouse and ensuring that inward investment is brought into the region.
Richard Bergen.
Last week, credit rating agency Moody's concluded that the Chancellor's decision to fully devolve business rates to local authorities will lead to an increase in council debt levels, fragmentation of the creditworthiness of local governments, and will leave many local councils, including Lancashire County Council, for example, with their credit rating downgraded. In light of this analysis, what safeguards can the Chancellor promise will be put in place to ensure that poorer areas of the country, including in the government's so-called Northern Powerhouse, do not lose out on vital revenue as a result of this government's reforms?
Long-term economic policy.
Mr. Speaker, I think the honourable gentleman needs to know that over many years, a large number of local authorities have been calling out for precisely this kind of devolution of the tax base, so they have control over their own decisions and the funding given towards them. And in actual fact, Mr. Speaker, many of the local authorities have been calling for these additional powers are precisely the Labour authorities in those inner city areas, particularly in the North and the Northern Powerhouse, and we intend to deliver on that to make sure there is devolution in this area.
And number 11, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, the Government is fully committed to implementing a robust and effective ring-fencing regime, and we remain firmly on track for separation of banks by January 2019. We passed the last legislation implementing the Independent Commission on Banking ring-fencing recommendations this year, and the Prudential Regulatory Authority is currently consulting on the second tranche of implementation rules before publishing the final rules this year.
David Mowat.
I thank the Minister for that answer. In 2012, the then Governor of the Bank of England said that unless these regulations were tightly specified, there was a risk of them being watered down before implementation in 2019. We now see Barclays joining RBS and Lloyds in requesting significant waivers. Could the City Minister reconfirm the Government's commitment to Vickers and the design principles within the legislation?
Well, of course, the Government remains as committed as ever to implementing a robust ring-fencing regime as recommended by the Independent Commission on Banking. Obviously, I'm not going to comment on speculation about how individual banks would like to implement their ring-fencing rules, because that's essentially a commercial decision for banks, as long as they remain compliant with the considerable restrictions imposed by the legislation. Their deadline is the start of 2019.
Pew.
Speaker, there's a lot of crying wolf and worried bleating from the banks on this very subject of ring fencing. Is the Minister aware of any banks that have decamped to foreign parts because of it?
The Government is delighted that the UK recently once again topped the poll as the #1 location for a global financial centre. We believe that our legal system, our language, our geographic location, our brilliant skilled workforce and many other factors contribute to the fact that this is an excellent place to locate a global financial services firm.
Indeed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My honourable friend is absolutely right to highlight the importance of increased productivity, which, along with growing employment, will drive growth, raise living standards and ensure a better quality of life for our citizens. Our productivity plan set out a range of reforms designed to make sure the UK remains a dynamic, open and enterprising economy, supported by long-term public and private investment in infrastructure, skills and science.
Carmichael.
Thank you very much. Does the Minister agree with me that the recent report by the Governor of the Bank of England highlighting Britain's membership of the European Union very positive and a authoritative terms, suggests that actually if we make sure we do get productivity right and do actually protect our financial services, the prospects for our economy will be very, very good, both dynamically and in terms of growth.
Well, as my right honourable friend the Chancellor has noted, the best outcome for the UK economy is that we achieve major economic reform of the EU. We want the UK to play a leading role in creating a dynamic, competitive and outward-focused Europe, delivering prosperity and security for every country in the EU, particularly by accelerating integration of the single market.
Sir Derek Twigg.
Mr. Speaker, one of the important factors in terms of increasing productivity is ensure that companies are able to invest in new plants and machinery. Is the Minister convinced that banks are doing all they can to lend to companies to ensure they can invest in plants and new machinery to improve productivity in their company?
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. He's absolutely right, of course, to identify the importance of private investment. That's one of the reasons why we've brought in the highest ever permanent level of the annual investment allowance. And, of course, banks play a really crucial role in identifying those opportunities.
Suella Fernandez.
Does the Minister agree that raising productivity is the route to raising living standards for everybody, and that this government's commitment to cutting corporation tax, historically high investment in infrastructure and the planning reforms will all contribute to achieving that aim?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I do agree with all that, and it is rising productivity that underpins rising real wages and therefore improving living standards.
Seema Malhotra.
Mr. Speaker, we don't export enough, we don't train enough, we don't save enough, we don't invest enough, we don't manufacture enough, we certainly don't build enough, and far too much of the economic activity in our nation is concentrated here in the centre of London. The Chancellor may recognise his own words from his Mansion House speech in July. Why was he so damning about his own record?
Well, Mr. Speaker, my right honourable friend has been absolutely consistent in identifying the need to rebalance the economy and for us to export more. And on the subject of productivity, I'm afraid the productivity gap that this country has existed for a very long time. I'm not even going to try and pin the blame entirely on the last Labour government. It's existed for longer than that, and we need to fill that gap. We need to address the shortcomings that our economy has had over a long period, and the productivity plan that this government is bringing in is doing just that.
Seema Malhotra.
I thank the Minister for his answer. The Chartered Institute of Personnel and Development have called his productivity plan fatally undermined by insufficient measures to improve the skills of the existing workforce. Could that be just one reason why the UK's productivity gap, compared with other G7 countries, has widened to the largest on record since 1991?
Mr. Speaker, of course she's right to identify the importance of skills, and that's why skills and human development is absolutely the heart of the productivity plan. The apprenticeship levy is a really important structural reform to help in the delivery of the 3 million apprenticeships we are going to deliver them. There's the network of institutes of technology and all the excellent work being done in the Department for Education, working on basic skills, including English and maths, which we know have such a vital and high value in the marketplace, both for employers and employees.
Question 13, Mr. Speaker.
The government is committed to raising the income tax personal allowance from £10,600 to £12,500 by the end of this Parliament. This is alongside our commitment to raise the higher rate threshold to £50,000. Over 30 million individuals will benefit from these changes. This year's summer budget confirmed that the personal allowance will increase to £11,000 next year and £11,200 in 2017-18.
I thank the Minister for that answer. And in raising the personal allowance, one of the most powerfully progressive things we are doing to move towards that lower tax, higher pay society, income tax cuts will mean that nearly 5,000 people in my constituency will be lifted entirely out of paying income tax. Does this not show that Conservatives are on the side of working people?
My honourable friend is absolutely right. Those working 30 hours a week on the national minimum wage will be taken out of income tax altogether and kept out of income tax. And I have to say, it contrasts with the position in 2010 when people earning just £6,500 were paying income tax, and those people have recently seen an increase in their marginal rate from 10% to 20%.
Ryan.
I say to the Minister, I think raising the personal allowance on its own is not a panacea and will do nothing to address the deep levels of poverty that exist amongst the working poor. Is he concerned at all at the recent ONS statistics that show that 6 million jobs pay less than the living wage?
The best way that we can address poverty is to ensure that we have a strong economy with jobs growing, increasing productivity, making sure that we've got the business investment that we need. A pro-business approach, good for job creation, is what this government is delivering. That's why there are more people in work than we've ever seen before.
Order. Topical questions. Carl Turner.
Topical 1.
Mr. Speaker, the core purpose of the Treasury is to ensure the stability and prosperity of the economy.
Government's defeat in the other place, 4,000 struggling families in East Hull would have lost, on average, £1,300 a year. So now that the Chancellor is in listening mode, would he please commit to dropping this vicious assault on hard-working families?
Well, in Kingston upon Hull, which he represents in this House, unemployment has fallen by 32% since this government came to office in 2010. And that is because we have delivered economic security and we have committed that Britain should live within her means. So yes, of course, we will listen, as I have said, to the transition we make to that lower welfare, higher wage economy, but we've got to go on making savings in our welfare budget, or else it will crowd out spending in our National Health Service and our education system, and it will mean that Hull does not have the resources it needs to thrive and prosper.
Lucy Allen.
Wage increases reduce the burden of tax credits on the taxpayer. What assessment does the Chancellor make of wage increases in my constituency, in the West Midlands and in the UK?
Well, we have very strong wage growth at the moment in the West Midlands and across the country. That is, of course, very welcome. The introduction of the national living wage is going to benefit, I think, around 300,000 people in the West Midlands, including her constituents. It is part of a package to support the working people that she represents and gives the economic security to that West Midlands engine that we all want to see.
Rosnara Ali.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Following last night's votes, the Chancellor said he'll listen. Can he confirm that he won't be writing to the 3 million families before Christmas, delivering the devastating news that their tax cuts would be slashed? Surely the Chancellor, an aspiring future Prime Minister, doesn't want to go down in history as Scrooge, delivering devastating news to millions of people, or does he?
Well, obviously, we will inform families once the changes we have made become law.
Damien Collins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Channel Tunnel and the Port of Dover are very important pieces of national infrastructure. But when there are disruptions to services, as we saw in chaotic scenes this summer, it causes misery for people in Kent. Would my right honourable friend agree to meet with me and other members of Parliament from Kent to discuss what funding can be made available to find a long-term solution to managing road freight in Kent and ending the misery of Operation Stack?
Well, of course, I'd be very happy to meet with my honourable friend and indeed other Kent MPs affected by the traffic jams that build up when there's disruption at the Channel Tunnel. Of course, we made available Manston Airport as a temporary measure to help alleviate the congestion caused by Operation Stack. I know there is a proposal from Kent for a much bigger investment in a longer-term solution, and I'm very happy to talk to him and his colleagues about it.
Carolyn Harris.
Mr. Speaker, given the growing evidence that fixed odds betting terminals are being used as a prime vehicle through which to launder money, can the Chancellor assure this House that there will be a prominent focus on these machines in its upcoming anti-laundering action plan?
Well, I'd like to thank the Honourable Lady for her question. She will be aware that we are in the process of considering how we implement the fourth Anti-Money Laundering Directive, and we will be looking very closely at the evidence, and I encourage her to get in touch with me.
James Morris.
Mr. Speaker, the Black Country Local Enterprise Partnership has done an excellent job in bringing jobs and investment to the Black Country. But would the Chancellor agree with me that the time has come for local enterprise partnerships to work together with the West Midlands Combined Authority to deliver deliver further growth, jobs and investment for the West Midlands region?
Well, I hear the member for Wolverhampton saying, well said, and in Worcestershire too. Let me make this point, which is I think we've got the real prospect in the West Midlands of a further big devolution to the combined authorities with an elected mayor. If we work with the local authorities and the three excellent LEPs and the local MPs, I think we are close to an agreement. Let's try and get it over the line, because I think that will give to the people of the West Midlands the control over local decision making, which we of course have now given to the people of South Yorkshire, Manchester, the North East and Teesside.
Foxcroft.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In my constituency of Lewisham-Deptford, there are 9,000 families with children claiming tax credits. 5,500 of these families are working families. The Chancellor said he is listening, but has dismissed every proposal so far. Millions of families need him to change course and make work pay. So will he listen now and introduce transitional relief so these working families will not be out of pocket by £1,300?
We are listening, and we are in particular listening to what we can do to help with the transition to the lower welfare, higher wage economy that we want to see in her constituency and indeed across the country. We, of course, will also take steps, as we always do, to help make sure work pays by increasing the personal allowance. We're committed to increasing that to £12,500 in this Parliament, by introducing the national living wage, which is going to help many thousands of people in her constituency, and indeed by supporting the businesses in her constituency, without which we wouldn't have the jobs that are now employing local people.
Chris Green.
Speaker, since 2010, over 37,000 of my constituents have had their taxes cut, enabling them to keep more of what they earn, and some for the first time being able to accumulate savings. Can the Chancellor assure my constituents in Bolton West that the government will continue to cut their taxes and support them with future saving?
Well, I can absolutely give my honourable friend, who represents his constituency so well in Bolton, and we will go on delivering the lower taxes to help the working people in his constituency. We will also make sure we go on supporting savings in his constituency, and we're introducing a new savings allowance and indeed a help to buy ISA to help those people he represents get on the housing ladder.
Bridget Phillipson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Chancellor seems to have taken issue with being told to think again by the other place last night. Will he now reflect on how thousands of my constituents must feel, people who work hard and do the right thing, at the prospect of losing thousands of pounds every year through his actions?
As I say, the people who suffer most when the economy fails and the country fails to control its public finances are precisely the people she is talking about, the low paid. They're the people who lose their jobs, and they are the victims of economic insecurity. We're determined to deliver that economic security, to deliver the controlled welfare bill that, after all, the people she represents have to pay for through their taxes, and we will set out how we will ease the transition to that lower welfare, higher wage economy.
Richard Graham.
Mr. Speaker, the coalition government freed pensioners from mandatory annuities and encouraged savings through ISAs and auto-enrolment. However, tax relief on contributions to pensions are expensive and favour high-rate taxpayers much more than others. Does my right honourable friend agree that this is an area where sensible reform could be considered to help balance the budget without disincentivising saving?
Well, of course, my honourable friend is right that we've taken significant steps to encourage saving, not least giving pensioners control over their pension pots in retirement and trusting those who have saved all their lives with that money that they have earned and put aside. As he well knows, I suspect because he's an expert in these areas, we are at the moment open to consultation on the system of the taxation of pensions. It's a completely open consultation, a genuinely green paper, and we're receiving a lot of interesting suggestions about potential reform, but we will respond to that fully in the budget.
Kirsten Oswald.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can the Chancellor confirm that there is nothing in the passing of the Charter for Budget Responsibility which restricts the Scottish Government's ability to borrow, already in statute under the 2012 Scotland Act?
Hear, hear. Yes, I'm happy to confirm that, of course, the deal we struck with the Scottish Government on capital borrowing it remains intact. Indeed, what we want to do is strike a new agreement with the Scottish Government, a new fiscal framework, and we're having a good discussion around capital borrowing powers, resource borrowing powers, and indeed the mechanism to genuinely make sure that Scotland sees both the benefits and bears the costs of any decision that is taken by the Scottish Government, which I think is the true nature of devolution, which I'm sure the SNP want to see. So let's make sure we get that agreement.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I welcome my right honourable friend's comments last night on transitional arrangements, but would he agree with me? We simply must reform this crazy tax credit system that enforces low pay, that we take no lessons from the opposition, which has failed cities like mine when it comes to helping the working poor, and that this tactic of bribing our lowest earners and most vulnerable not to improve social mobility and help them, but simply to win their votes is deplorable and must end in this country for good.
Well, I think my honourable friend makes a powerful point that we created a welfare system which subsidises low pay, and surely it's better to increase that pay. That's why we're introducing the national living wage, and I know that will help many of the people he represents in Plymouth.
Mary Glindon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Under the devolution deal, the Chancellor has committed £30 million a year to create a new investment fund for the North East. Will this be wholly new money, or will existing grants be cut? Where is the guarantee that he won't be robbing Peter to pay Paul?
Well, it is additional new money, and it's a long-term commitment to the North East of England. And of course, we couldn't have reached this agreement without the support of the local Labour council leaders who have come together through the combined authority to strike what I think is a really historic deal. There's been lots of conversation over many years about devolving power to the North East. Now we're going to have the elected mayor with powers that are currently exercised in London being exercised in the North East, and that is proper devolution.
Yeah. James Heapy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last week, Mudgley cider producer Roger Wilkins told the local press that cider is an agricultural lubricant, an agricultural wine for the working man. Will the Chancellor continue to support hard-working people and lubricate the Somerset economy by cutting tax on cider?
Well, I very much remember my visit, I think with the Prime Minister, to a cider producer in his constituency before the election. It turned out to be an extremely productive visit, as it happens, of which he is the living representative. But he will know that in 2010 we actually reversed the cider tax that was being proposed by the previous Labour government, and we've been able to help cider producers. I think the industry is incredibly important, and I'll take what steps I can to support them in the future.
Marie Rimmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Resolution Foundation has found that all tax and benefit measures announced, including the national living wage, will push an additional 200 children into poverty by 2016. Two-thirds of those children will be in working families, and by 2020 there'll be up to 600 further children pushed into poverty. Chancellor, you said you listened to the Lords, and indeed the bishops last night. Will you now share with the honourable members today what constructive action you will take to protect the poorest of families and children?
No, well, I'd say to the honourable lady, and she raises her question in a perfectly fair way. I will listen to the concerns that have been raised in the elected chamber, about the transition in the welfare reforms that we have put forward, precisely so that we continue to help working families. I think those families are best helped when we have economic security, a controlled welfare budget, and a system where we don't subsidise low pay, but we increase wages through the national living wage. And we will make sure in the autumn statement that we do help working families.
I didn't want to interrupt the question because I understood the Honourable Lady was getting to her point, and I understand, colleagues, why members like to put their inquiries directly to the Minister. But can I please appeal to members not to use the word you in their questions? We do go through the chair with debate for good reasons, and I have no proposals on these matters. The Chancellor might have. We shall see. Mr. Christopher Pincher.
Mr. Speaker, over the last 3 years, unemployment in Tamworth has fallen faster than anywhere else
in the country. As my right honourable friend is in listening mode, can he tell the House whether he's heard any sensible representations from the Shadow Chancellor or others about how to decrease business taxation and regulation to create more jobs in the West Midlands?
Well, I'm sorry to say that I have not, because the only proposals that have so far been put by the party opposite are for an increase in business taxation. That indeed was in their election manifesto. And indeed, the Shadow Chancellor was talking at the weekend about a potential wealth tax being introduced in this country. So his proposals, and to be perfectly fair to him, he's been entirely consistent on this for 30 years. His proposals are for a essentially high tax, big state economy where, frankly, private businesses don't have such a big role to play. I think that's the wrong direction for our country.
Patrick Grady.
Speaker, how much would the Chancellor save for the public purse by abolishing the House of Lords?
Now that is a very decent proposal for the autumn statement, which we will give proper consideration to. Look, as I said, I don't think anyone. I think people who've been in Parliament with me for the last 14 years know my view is pretty clear. We should have an elected House of Lords, but of course that view has not prevailed in this chamber in the years that I've been both on the opposition benches and the government benches. But I do think, while we have an unelected Lords, it should respect a constitutional convention that has existed for 100 years, and we need to look at that now.
Order. I'm sorry. Demand always exceeds supply. We will come to points of order. The honourable gentleman is being preserved. We will come back to him. But first, I wish to hear the Standing Order number 24 application from Dr. Ailey Whiteford.
Mr Speaker, I seek leave to propose that the House should debate a specific and important matter that should have urgent consideration, namely the uncertainty caused to millions of UK families following the vote on tax credits in the House of Lords yesterday. Accordingly, therefore, I would like to apply for an emergency debate under Standing Order number 24. Across the UK, there are 7 million working-age families with children eligible for tax credits, and the impact of this government's proposed tax and benefits changes will be to reduce their incomes by an average of almost £1,300 a year. In Scotland, over 200,000 working families with around 350,000 children are set to lose out. That's an enormous and disproportionate impact on parents who are working hard in low-paid jobs to support their families. But yesterday's votes in the House of Lords, when peers passed amendments for the cuts to be put on hold, subject to independent analysis, and for transitional protections to be put in place for 3 years for those affected by them, throws the government's plans into chaos and leaves low-income families in the dark. Members of this House need to know how the government intends to respond and needs to know as a matter of urgency. Mr Speaker, yesterday in the House of Lords, the wheels came off the wagon quite spectacularly for the government's austerity reforms, in spite of a valiant whipping effort that saw 93% of Tory peers turn up to support the government. The degree of crossbench concern about the injustice of these measures is almost unprecedented. I know I'm not the only person on this side of the House, and indeed on the other side of the House, who berates the House of Lords as an affront to a modern democracy, but even our unelected, unaccountable and, in my view, rather bloated second chamber unites to tell the government they've got it very wrong, then it's incumbent on the government to listen. When even the leader of the Tory party in Scotland tells her own government that these tax credits are, I quote, not acceptable and that they need to think again, then it's incumbent on the government to listen. The government's tried to present these austerity cuts as part of a package of measures, but we know that their paltry increases to the minimum wage fall very far short of a real living wage. This government has made a choice to put parents with low-paid jobs on the front line of its failed austerity agenda, and we need answers from them urgently. What transitional arrangements are now being put in place for the millions of working families who are set to lose out? And will they give us a cast-iron assurance that they will not now flood the other place with more Tory appointees who turn up like phantoms to do their dirty work?
Order. I've listened carefully to what the honourable member has said, and I have to give my decision on this matter without stating any reasons. That is the requirement upon the Chair. I'm afraid that I do not consider that the matter which the Honourable Lady has raised is appropriate for discussion under Standing Order number 24, and I cannot therefore submit the application to the House. I said that I'm not required to give any reasons, and indeed there's a sense in which I'm required to give no reasons. I do, however, think it's important for people beyond this House to find our procedures entirely intelligible. And I think it worthwhile to note that these important matters have just been debated. They will be debated further today, and there is a scheduled debate on them on Thursday. Members have other means by which to pursue these matters, and I feel sure they will. But the Honourable Lady has very properly asked me whether I think this should be debated as an emergency debate under Standing Order 24, and having reflected upon what she said, my answer on this occasion is no.
Point of order, Mr. Speaker.
Points of order, yes. A point of order, Dr. Liam Fox.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Across the House, there is a great deal of genuine concern about the implications of the events in the unelected chamber last night, and many of us would welcome your initial view on the constitutional implications of that. Many of us believe that those with no accountability for taxation have a moral duty not to vote on such issues, and many of us would go further and believe that it's a bit rich to question, for example, the democratic deficit in the European Union when we have an unelected, unappointed chamber as part of our own legislature.
Just before I respond to the Right Honourable Gentleman, Member for Woodspring, from North Somerset, I will hear the Honourable Gentleman's point of order.
Mr. Speaker, further to that point of order, I looked through the standing orders myself last night and discovered that the unelected, what the Honourable Lady called an unelected, unaccountable and somewhat bloated second chamber, actually have no power at all to reject European Union treaties, such as the TTIP one, but do have the power, it seems, to reject the elected will of this House. As a doughty defender of elected members of Parliament, will the Speaker be issuing guidance to us as to how we may ensure that the elected will of this House prevails?
Well, I think I'll do a wrap-up at the end. Let's hear from the Honourable Gentleman, and we must hear Mr. Rees-Mogg. The day wouldn't be complete without him. Mr.
I'm grateful for that, Mr. Speaker, and also grateful to hear the late conversion of honourable members on the opposite side to democracy and to a rejection perhaps of an unelected chamber. But can you give me some guidance, Mr. Speaker? Is there not a constitutional role for the other place in giving a pause to this House when perhaps this House has made a decision that is out of sync with feelings in the country, so that perhaps this House can look at that decision again?
Order. I say to the Honourable Gentleman, who is a very distinguished taxi driver by profession, he will be aware of the cab rank principle and also of the principle of waiting in a queue for one's turn. We'll come to the Honourable Member. Don't worry, he won't go cold. We'll look after his interests, I'm sure. Mr. Jacob Rees-Mogg.
Speaker, further to the points of order, I wonder what you, Mr. Speaker, will do to remind their lordships of our Declaration of Privilege from 1678, declaring that all financial matters pertain to this House, a privilege that the House of Lords has only now ignored 3 times since 1860, and as our voice piece, our mouthpiece, will you, Mr. Speaker, bring this to the attention of their lordships in no uncertain terms?
And I will take the point of order from Mr. Alex Salmond.
Mr. Speaker, I'm becoming increasingly concerned about the outbreak of revolutionary fervour across the benches, but has there been a precedent ever, Mr. Speaker, for a Chancellor of the Exchequer to be outflanked as a defender of the working classes by the House of Lords?
I think Mr. Efford's about to burst. We better take him. Point of order, Mr. Clive Efford.
I'll wait on your pleasure, Mr. Speaker. But
Can I point out, Mr. Speaker, that we've had a general election this year, and consistently during that general election, the question was asked whether the government had any intention to cut tax credits, and they consistently said that was not their intention. Now, it is parliamentary convention that the House of Lords does not overturn manifesto commitments, but this was not in their manifesto, and there is clear concern in the country about this measure, and it is right that the House of Lords should ask them to think again.
One doesn't have to put one's hand up. It's not necessary. But Mr. Doherty, it will be a pleasure to hear your point of order.
It seems that the House of Lords is causing some angst today, and the unelected, unaccountable, bloated chamber through the other door. Could the Speaker forgive my ignorance as a new member and highlight to me, and I'm sure many of my colleagues in the SNP benches, how the unelectable, unaccountable barons and baronets of Scottish peerage will be conducting their affairs, whilst we cannot vote on issues in this House, they will vote in the other.
The short answer to the last question, which I think had something of the character of a rhetorical inquiry, is no. And let me say with all courtesy to the House that I was keen to hear all of the points of order before responding. And I intend no discourtesy to the House when I simply say this. The responsibility of the chair is for order. Nothing disorderly has occurred. There has been no procedural impropriety. That would not have been allowed. Whether people like what happened last night on the substance of the issue or in terms of their views on constitutionality is a matter for each and every one of them. In terms of where matters rest, as I said last night from the Chair, in response to a point of order from the Shadow Chancellor, this is now a matter for the government to take forward as it thinks fit. And I say, with reference to the point of order from the Chair of the Welsh Affairs Select Committee, the honourable gentleman flatters me. He does not need guidance from me in how to go about his duties, and neither does any other honourable or right honourable member. It's not for the Chair to put a gloss on matters that transpired last night. And I think, in truth, members actually aren't all that interested in my gloss or my response to their points of order. They simply wanted to get their views on the record. And that they have done. If there is... Mr Rees-Mogg, I'll indulge you one further.
I'm grateful, Mr Speaker. I would refer back to this House's claim of privilege, and that this has been a claim we've made for many centuries, and I would have thought, Mr Speaker, that you are the defender of this House's privileges, and this is beyond the immediate political debate.
The matters that are currently in dispute are inevitably of what I will call a high-octane character. In such circumstances, if I may very politely and respectfully say to the honourable gentleman, the member for North East Somerset, I don't think it helps matters if the chair adds in substantive terms, without exceptionally good reason, to the total number of evaluative comments that have already been made. I think it would be better not to do so. I do jealously guard the rights of this House, but I have to rest with what I've said, that nothing procedurally improper has taken place. Let's wait to see how matters are taken forward. And as I said to the honourable gentleman, the member for Gainsborough, last week, in the final analysis, each House knows what its powers are and are not. Point of order, Mr David Winnick.
Mr Speaker, whether it would be in order for a motion to be debated on the floor of the House, congratulating the House of Lords on what they decided yesterday.
The short answer to the honourable gentleman is that that would be entirely orderly if the honourable gentleman for example, secured a backbench business committee debate. It is not for me to encourage such a debate, nor to discourage it, but the answer to the honourable gentleman's question is as I have stated. If there are no further points of order, perhaps we can now proceed with the 10-minute rule motion. Tasmina Ahmed Sheikh.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move that leave be given for me to bring in a bill to amend the system of benefit sanctions, establish automatic hardship payments where sanctions have been imposed, and for connected purposes. Mr. Speaker, there are people in my constituency who have no food to eat today. Until recently, they've been claiming employment and support allowance or job seekers allowance. Their social security payments have been stopped. They have been sanctioned, Mr. Speaker. As things currently stand, they have no immediate right of appeal. Some of these people may have made a mistake in their paperwork or have been late for an appointment. They may lack the necessary IT skills to use Universal Job Match or have been asked to do something by job centre staff which they didn't do. Whatever their actions, the current consequences carry too heavy a burden. These people are now left with absolutely no means to sustain themselves. On every level, this is an unacceptable state of affairs. This is a central issue that my proposed bill addresses. It will ensure that all those who were sanctioned will automatically and immediately receive a hardship payment, and that these payments will not require to be repaid. Mr. Speaker, the current system has punished military veterans for selling poppies. It has removed the sole source of income from those who failed to complete their medical examination because they were having a heart attack at the time. And it has withheld money from people who failed to complete their job search evidence form on Christmas Day. Indeed, one of my constituents was recently sanctioned on the strength of hearsay evidence that she had been incarcerated, despite this being wholly untrue. It cannot be right that sanctions are applied on this basis. The system which administers these punishments is deeply and fundamentally flawed. Many of those affected aren't even aware of their rights. I've met constituents who are not told about hardship payments by staff at the local job centre or even how to appeal. That's why this proposal gives those facing sanctions an automatic right to these payments. This will ensure uniformity in their application. In my view, Mr. Speaker, anyone who lacks the means to buy food or heat their homes is a vulnerable person. There is currently a formal appeals process. When invoked, Mr. Speaker, 50% of these appeals against sanctions are upheld. Half of them. This is a system which is at best 50% correct. If there was another process in this land which resulted in half of the judgments being overturned, there would be a national outcry. The human impact of sanctions is such that DWP staff have been required to receive guidance on how to deal with victims suffering from mental health issues who are pushed towards self-harm or suicide. It is right that staff have measures in place to help them support vulnerable people who've been driven to their limit, but it's tragic that this has to be seen as a central part of our welfare system. The Department of Work and Pensions has not been able to use their experience to provide any credible evidence whatsoever that this system of financial penalties works to get people back into stable employment. And I am particularly disappointed that the Government have failed to act adequately in this matter in their response last week to the Select Committee report. This Chamber has heard time and time again that this is an ideological crusade against the poor, not an evidence-based mechanism to help people find work. Mr. Speaker, it's driving people in this country to food banks. Organisations like the Trussell Trust and local food banks like the Gate in Alloa exist because they identified a need that requires to be met. They should not be a necessary extension to the UK's failing benefit system, but they are. The social security system as it exists today is not doing what it says on the tin, and the vulnerable cannot wait any longer for this government to get it right. Research carried out by the Child Poverty Action Group has found that 20 to 30% of food bank users said that their household's benefits had recently been stopped or reduced because of a sanction. The same research showed that deciding to accept help from a food bank was often difficult and described by participants as being unnatural, embarrassing and shameful. Mr. Speaker, what does it say about us if fellow citizens have to rely on charity to sustain themselves? The protection of the vulnerable should be a central tenet of any government's work. It is not a peripheral responsibility and should certainly not be devolved to the kindness of others. Other research from Oxfam presented as evidence to the Work and Pension Select Committee earlier this year showed that when women are sanctioned, it tends to disproportionately affect them because caring responsibilities often fall to them. Further, charities such as the Single Parent Action Network and Gingerbread have seen a reduction in the number of DWP advisors who are aware that they are able to use flexibility when dealing with lone parents who would otherwise face financial sanctions. This leads to a significant number of lone parents being sanctioned erroneously, only to have the decision overturned. According to Gingerbread, that's 42% for lone parents, compared with 31% of all claimants. The current regime impacts greatly on women, Mr. Speaker, and that's why I'm particularly proud that this bill has the cross-party support of 9 female MPs. As the House will be aware, 6 months ago the Work and Pensions Committee called for a broad and independent review of benefit conditionality and sanctions because of their concerns over the effectiveness and operation of the current process. After considering this balanced cross-party report for half a year, last week the Government rejected its central proposal. Mr. Speaker, instead of a fundamental review of the whole system, this Government proposes what they call a yellow card system. A yellow card? Mr. Speaker, a yellow card is something you get during a football or rugby match. This is no game, and in my view, such terminology is unhelpful and wholly inappropriate. A complete rethink of the process is required. The tired old argument that this helps people to find work has not been proven, while the evidence of the despair and poverty inflicted on its victims is growing larger by the day. It must be reformed here, Mr. Speaker, because the limited powers over welfare that have been offered by this Conservative Government to the Scottish Parliament specifically preclude measures to mitigate against the system I have described today. The Scottish Parliament should be given the powers required to build a humane system of social security, not piecemeal powers which can only mitigate the negative impact of these Tory policies. From the sanctions regime to the tax credit fiasco, this Government continues to punish the poor. This relentless assault must come to an end. Mr. Speaker, the bill I bring to the House today will not address all the serious problems of this punitive system. I wish it could. I continue to support a full moratorium on all benefit sanctions until an independent and fundamental review of the whole process can take place. But under this particular parliamentary process, I believe I propose to the House a simple and pragmatic measure which would address the fundamental issue of people being knowingly left in destitution. This bill will ensure that those who are sanctioned will automatically and immediately receive a hardship payment, and that these payments will not need to be repaid. No one should be left without by our social security system. This Government should not abandon those people who need its help the most. Ministers must reconsider their position on this fundamental issue. It is the right thing to do. My proposal would be a positive first step in protecting the vulnerable in my constituency and beyond. Mr. Speaker, the sanctions system is why an increasing number of people and their families in every part of our country do not have the means to eat today. It is one of the key reasons why food bank use in Scotland and across the whole of the UK is at an all-time high. The system it supports is flawed and needs urgent reform. It's why I believe this bill is necessary, and so I urge this House to support me today.
The question is that the honourable member have leave to bring in the bill. Mr Philip Davis.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I rise to oppose this bill. Of course, I congratulate the Honourable Lady on bringing forward her bill. I believe she used to be a member of the Conservative Party, Mr Speaker. She's certainly regressed since those heady days. It seems a long time ago since she was espousing any Conservative principles, certainly